I started all this because I knew that there were a lot of things that were wrong that were happening. And some people knew about it, but a lot of people didn't because they're not reader types or because they just didn't get the right publications. And so I thought, this is another way to get information out. I might as well try and do it. And to my somewhat surprise, it's actually gone pretty well. And a lot of people listen to me, and I'm glad you do. I hope that I've been a good source of information for you. I'm sorry if I've ever been unwarrantedly biased. I definitely have a worldview that I have. I've been honest about that from the very beginning. I'm traditionalist conservative. I have a biblical worldview. I'm unapologetic about that. Someone would call me a fundamentalist, and I wouldn't shrink from that. But I'm also a child of, I was raised by baby boomers who raised me to be colorblind in my racial disposition. I know that the definition of racism has changed in the last 10 years. I'm an old school colorblind person. I believe that God made us all in his image, no matter what ethnicity we come from. And I believe that the kingdom is marked not by racial separation or segregation, but by us being together. I think this is a plain reading of 1 Corinthians 12. I think it's a worldly lens that separates people according to their ethnicity and culture. I think it's thoroughly un-American as well, which is why I've been very consistent in my coverage throughout all this, that the way that the United Methodist Church treats Africa is wrong. There's no way to excuse it. And I understand there are some creative ways in which people do mental gymnastics to disregard the vast majority of African voices as being pawns of people in the WCA or Good News or whatever. I need to urge you, if you have been at all inclined to believe that, to reconsider because there are a lot of things on the line in the next couple weeks. And it's not just that my old side, I'm not in the United Methodist Church anymore. I'm Global Methodist. The reason I'm commenting on this is because Africans were not allowed to vote to disaffiliate from the denomination. They are being dragged along whatever direction the privileged Americans are going to go. The Americans have stacked it up just right, where even though African United Methodists outnumber Americans, the vast majority of the representation goes to American interests over every other ethnicity. So that alone belies all this anti-racist talk that the United Methodist Church is doing. They talk a good game about how, we need to set aside our privilege and we need to elevate other voices. The thing about that is it's a lie. They've been seeing red for decades. They've had one agenda. The odds have not been on their side. They have just gotten to barely arrange all of this for just a moment where they're going to be able to maybe, probably, liberalize the sexual ethics position of the denomination. They're probably going to be able to pull that off because so many African votes have been disenfranchised, because so many of the conservative American voices left. This is how it's going to work out for just a second. They're going to be able to clinch more than a 50% vote, but they're not going to be able to clinch the big regionalization push that they're doing, which means they're dragging a bunch of Africans along with their Potemkin interest, obsession in sexual ethics that is not matched by the majority world Christianity, rather than humbly accepting that they started a global denomination and they need to submit to the overall will of the General Conference as it has been spoken for decades. They've arranged all these cards just right so that they can get their Pyrrhic victory while they destroy the whole denomination. So that's how I'm going to set this up as we look at this latest statement from the African Initiative. The African Initiative, I've interviewed many Africans. You can go back on my records. I've got a whole series of African voices that I've interviewed. Jerry Kula is the primary person associated with it, but also Simon Mafunda and Ande Emmanuel. I interviewed all three of them, and they were on the ground floor of starting this organization that speaks for the majority African position. Now, Africa Voices of Unity, which now Ande Emmanuel leads, as well as the United Methodist Africa Forum, have both issued statements that I recently covered. Well, I didn't cover Ande's outfit because I suspect it's mostly just him. I think he's the only real voice there. But the United Methodist Africa Forum represents a few other voices, and all of these African voices have decried the treatment of African delegates in the lead up to this General Conference. The United Methodist Africa Forum statement that I read on the Considering Charlotte episode that we published a couple days ago, they said that they had been psychologically manipulated. This is the group that met in Tanzania and came out making a statement in favor of regionalization. That people like me have been inclined to think that they've been bought and paid for. Even they have said that this General Conference coming up is bogus. They've not used the word bogus. They have questioned the legitimacy of any such group. And I'm going to say it flatly right now. Whatever decisions the General Conference makes next week and the week after are going to be illegitimate because so many votes have been disenfranchised and because the leadership of the denomination has dishonestly arranged all of these moving parts. So some of the particulars, I've talked about this. I raised the alarm on these letters not going out 6 months ago, and people called me a liar or they dismissed me in some way or another. Now it's coming down to it. We're going to go over the numbers of how many delegates are not going to be able to attend, and it's abominable. So I'm going to direct you to my screen now. This is a press release put out on, I got it on the 16th, but it says that it was put out on the 12th. And it describes here a gathering that they had in Nairobi, Kenya, at the Desmond Tutu Retreat Center. And it has a basic setup that I'll let you read on your own. The one thing I wanted to highlight in the first couple paragraphs was that they focused on evaluating the past, namely the historicity of the birth of Christianity in Africa leading to its current massive growth. So this is one of the things that my friend Odell Horn has focused on is we keep treating Christianity in the United Methodist Church as though it's a uniquely a white phenomenon that we exported to Africa. It's not the case. It's the case that it was, to begin with, a Middle Eastern faith that quickly went into Africa, and white people received it from those ethnicities. And so this is not something that in its bones is white. And its bones, it's godly. And then its starting point was not with white people. And then it says that they held frank discussions, and then it gets to the specific policies that they are adopting leading up into this General Conference. There are going to be some that are able to go, and here's how the majority of them stand. There is going to be legitimate questions asked. Okay, there was supposedly a gathering in Tanzania that had a majority of the African representatives in it, and they said they want regionalization. So how do we make the case here? The case is the United Methodist Africa Forum never released any names or a list or even an actual number to my knowledge. Actually, I think they did have a number. I'm going to retract that. There was no official list. So I'm gonna put out an ask and see if they have a list of names associated with this in the Africa Forum. The Africa Initiative. I hope I don't get too confused on this. What the people I've talked to have alleged is that the United Methodist Africa Forum was not a majority of delegates. It was just a bunch of people that they were able to throw together. United Methodist Africa Forum has always, to my knowledge, represented a majority of African voices in United Methodism in Africa. So their first agenda item is no regionalization in the United Methodist Church. Here's the reasons that they give. They give several. One is regionalization it contradicts our current connectional system. This is self-evident. It interrupts shared connectional identity, and it fractures the church. It brings the current setup brings together quadrennial representatives from all the annual conferences worldwide to decide on social, economic, political, and theological issues and concerns of the denomination. So the second reason is that regionalization fragments our one worldwide United Methodist Church. So I would once again direct you to 1 Corinthians, where Paul talks about the nature of the body and how they're not meant to operate autocephalously or separately. Of course, the authors of the Christian Covenant, the people pushing regionalization, are saying, no, we would still have a combined book of discipline and we would have some shared polity. But the underlying argument here is not nearly enough, not in any significant way. And so the language they use, it's going to divide them into several regional denominations, allowing each region to govern itself with its own book of discipline, exclusive of the other regions. Under such an arrangement, if regionalization passes, no region would have a say in what another region believes, teaches, or practices. we would be a divided church preaching different gospels, pretending to be one denomination. I'll come back to the Berlin Conference thing in a second, but in the Considering Charlotte series, we interviewed Lloyd Nyarota, who is one of the Christmas Covenant authors, and he said he would argue with this. He said there are practices, beliefs that regional conferences can preach that the others can, by a majority vote, discount and say, no, you can't do that. So some people might cry foul here and say, no, they can still cancel each other out. Realistically, that's not going to happen. It's not a realistic scenario. Liberals in America have been unwilling to receive correction from the overall General Conference for decades. Why do we think that now they would receive correction from a majority of the regional conferences when they're the ones producing all the money? If you've heard Mark Holland of Mainstream UMC talk, that's all he cares about. Where does the money come from? We give it. We don't have to do what you guys say. You can't have our money. He has said this in multiple occasions in different wording. That's what this is going to come down to. There might be things that are put in writing that will hypothetically keep different regions in check. Realistically, if you adopt a regionalization plan, liberals in America will receive no correction from anyone anywhere ever, because they already don't. So the second thing it says here, additionally, for Africa, regionalization is reminiscent of the 1885 Berlin Conference, where the partitioning and parceling out of Africa took place. We reject this subtle plan to take contemporary Africa back to that colonial era in the name of regionalization. So did they just call the liberal agenda in the UMC a colonialist agenda? Yes, they did. They're saying that this is akin to the Western powers parceling out Africa. So I couldn't say it any better. The third reason they don't like regionalization, it's a recipe for fragmenting the message of the gospel and thereby presenting a distorted Christianity to the world that contradicts the biblically based liberating message of the gospel of Jesus Christ. I don't know that I have a lot more to add to that. I think it's fundamentally a biblical theological issue. If there was something in the Bible that justified separation within the church based on ethnicity, I think I would have to shut my mouth. I can't think of a single thing in the Bible that would justify partitioning the church by ethnicity. I realize that Eastern Orthodoxy sort of does that. But even when they do that, it doesn't really work like that. So what the United Methodist Church is striving to do really is quite exceptional in how starkly it divides along racial, ethnic lines, cultural lines as well. The fourth reason, regionalization is an economic death trap for the UMC in Africa and other central conferences with limited financial resources. So one of the things that you'll understand whenever you listen to Mark Holland of Mainstream UMC, they're the ones with the 5 R's, one of which is regionalization. He's the one I just said is explicitly talking about the money, and he's very clear that Americans have given the money, Americans need to maintain control of the money, Africans should not get control of this money, which is going to happen if they all stay together because Africa is growing and North America is rightfully dying because it does not generally proclaim the life-saving gospel of Jesus Christ anymore. That's just, I'm not saying nobody does, I'm saying generally they have gotten away from the repent and be saved from your sins narrative, and it's more have the right political stance, vote the right way, have the right stance with the environment, So it's highlighting here that if you separate out the finances according to these regions, you are going to starve Africa. The regionalization proposal aims to group the 5 jurisdictions in America into one region. I'm actually not sure that's true. I think Lloyd Nyarota I think he said explicitly that it's more than one. I think it's 2 or 3. While disintegrating the 3 central conferences in Africa into 3 regions. Given that the 5 jurisdictions of the UMC in America are combining their economic resources and political forces to be one region at the expense of other central conferences, that they're proposing will stand alone as individual regions. Any attempt to regionalize the denomination could financially disenfranchise the rest of the... So they parse it right. It's not saying... They don't say it will do this. They're saying it could do this. It's likely it will do this. The United Methodist Church in America is going to be really hurting for money. It's very hard to believe that they would continue to send money that they could use on themselves over to Africa. So the denomination could financially disenfranchise the rest of the UMC worldwide, Africa in particular. Such a decision would give the American United Methodist Church the controlling power economically and politically, even though they are fast declining in number. It could also create greater financial dependency on the West, with perilous consequences for the rest. As I'm looking at that, I mean, it's just so obviously not right. It's been clear to me and many others for a long time that the West, even though we're financially gifted, we're spiritually impoverished, and we need to share our material wealth with others around the world, and others around the world need to share of their spiritual wealth with us. The Western United Methodist Church, American United Methodist Church, the liberal United Methodist, they're refusing to participate in that worldview. They continue to think that despite their abysmal performance, that they have something to offer, and other people need to continue to watch them and listen, when all evidence is to the contrary. So what the Africa Initiative is highlighting is how just on its face ridiculous the liberal position is, especially as they're trying to get control of this money that they've offered thus far. Which, by the way, if you haven't seen the portion I did on Matthew Conover, the denomination has more in reserves than they need for an entire quadrennium, undesignated reserves that they could use for whatever they want. But they're going to continue to tax local churches because they can. All right, the fifth reason is regionalization would liberalize the United Methodist Church worldwide, thus making the denomination biblically and theologically unsafe and unwelcome for evangelicals and conservatives. So very easy. They don't say this in here, but there's a new revised social principles that they're going to want to adopt for the whole denomination that liberalizes the sexual position. Actually, I do think it talks about it in here. The liberals and progressives within the UMC have publicly indicated in print and electronic media that they will remove the restrictive language in the denomination. So, okay, they do talk about it, regarding sexual orientations, same-gendered marriage, ordination of LGBTQIA plus persons as clergy, and the election and the consecration of gays and lesbians as bishops. Regionalization supports this plan. We therefore reject the regionalization petition. Yeah, there's a family of legislative agendas from the institution and liberal denominational stuff that's all connected. So Africans are not stupid. They see this, and they're doing the only thing you can do with militant progressives, just saying, I see what you're doing. I see you. Yeah, your actions tell me who you are. You're telegraphing what you're doing. We see it. We don't like it. Stop it. The second thing they on their agenda collectively is reject changes to the definition of marriage and all petitions that attempt to liberalize our sexual ethics. So here's where they highlight the language. Can I not select that? Yeah, okay. Marriage is a covenant relationship between a man and a woman. In the new social principles, they're changing that to marriage is a relationship between two people of faith. We reject these petitions because Scripture teaches that same-sex union is sin and thus incompatible with Christian living. I don't need to belabor this. We've been talking about it for years. I'm not going to convince you. You're not going to convince me. But the thing is, everybody is saying to the Africans, no, regionalization, you can have your own theology in your own region. That is not true. Social principles are going to apply across the whole denomination. This is one of the things that's going to carry over. And if you force this through, you are alienating Africans, not just from their social context, which is something that liberals care about. You're alienating them from the Bible as they understand it. It's a coercive colonialist thing to do. It's unexcusable by liberals' own moral framework. The only way they justify it is this kind of might makes right combined with we're on the right side of history. Why? Because we feel like we are. It's morally unconscionable. The third agenda item is strong support for disaffiliation petitions for fairness and justice. This is an issue of fairness and justice. They say they highlight how it is that Africans and Filipinos, anyone outside of the United States, was not given the option to disaffiliate. In the latter part of this, it says, we have been treated as second-class members of the one denomination to which we all belong. We believe that what is good and fair for annual conferences or jurisdictions in America should be good and fair for annual conferences in Africa. So we therefore support the petitions to allow annual conferences in local churches in Africa, Asia, Europe, the right to go through the process of discernment. It's not really a good reason to go against this. I know there was a dust-up between Rob Renfro and one of the members of the Standing Committee on Central Conference Matters. She intentionally obfuscated the issue. There is, in the Book of Discipline, a provision for an entire Central Conference to disaffiliate. That's not what they're talking about. They're talking about each individual church in America was given the option to disaffiliate. That is what is required internationally if there's going to be fair treatment for all. Is there any singular good reason why non-American churches should be treated at a different standard than American churches? That's just biblically unjustifiable. The fourth agenda is request Episcopal elections within 3 months after General Conference. This is something I've tried to understand at different times. There was a mandatory retirement period for African bishops that was not observed. The underlined part here, some influential leaders within the UMC appear to be making efforts to extend the stay of some bishops who are overdue for retirement into office until December 2024 before conducting Episcopal elections in the Central Conferences in Africa. This proposed plan, if implemented, would be a gross violation of the Book of Discipline. So they're calling on very speedy re-elections to get new bishops that are younger, more capable, haven't been instantiated as long as they have. So the final part is where the real fireworks are. Following the passing of these resolutions, delegates elected by their annual conferences to the 2020 General Conference lamented their disenfranchisement by the Commission on General Conference and its staff. So they had to stick with the same delegates. There were no new elections. General Conference 2020 wasn't canceled. It was delayed until next week. It's 2024 now, but it's the delayed, that's not the word used, 2020 General Conference, and they've been disenfranchised, they said. How? We are deeply grieved that the Commission has alienated some of our delegates from participating in the events of the General Conference by its poor handling of General Conference matters. The Commission staff communicated poorly with the heads of delegations regarding their delegates' registration and participation. It sent out invitation letters to some delegates only 2 months before General Conference, while others did not receive their invitation letters until 1 month ago. Unlike previous General Conferences, where the process was better organized, knowing very well that it takes 4 to 6 months to process visas at most American assemblies, embassies in Africa. So this is the thing that I've been hollering about, and it's the case, and everybody knows it. Even Mark Holland put out a thing decrying that this was a month ago that I put out the piece reading through his letter saying that entire delegations had not received letters yet. Everybody knows it's unacceptable. The letter goes on, some delegates who succeeded at booking interviews and were denied could not be replaced because the Commission staff failed to timely send invitation letters to official alternate delegates, despite endless appeals from the heads of delegations. Therefore, here's the part I underlined, for the first time in General Conference history, about 60 to 80 official delegates from Africa may be absent at the General Conference, not by their choice, but due to failures on the part of the Commission on General Conference and its staff, which appear to the casual observer to have the purpose of marginalizing African delegates and reducing their delegations. So here's true facts. The whole General Conference was delayed, which gave them 4 more years to do their jobs. Joe DiPaolo resigned from the Commission on General Conference because they were refusing to do their jobs several years ago. This is... It's very difficult to believe that it was negligence that resulted in this current picture. It's unreasonable to expect people to believe that. Rather, with people like me ringing the alarm, many people interceding to get them moving, all the time they were given, all the experience they have in doing this in the past, it seems quite clear that this was intentionally done to disenfranchise the African voice. Of course, they did get more than half are still going to be there. But they didn't need to exclude all of them. They just needed to exclude enough so that they could pass their agenda through. Africa Initiative says, we want the world to know that leaders and staff of the Commission on the 2024 General Conference they're talking about next week, they have treated the delegates from the central conferences in Africa very unfairly and with disdain. We come to this general conference with a deep sense of rejection, unacceptance, and gross disenfranchisement, as if we do not matter. This brings to question the credibility of a general conference session held under such conditions. Our confidence in the leaders and staff responsible for the 2024 General Conference is totally lost. We, however, come to contend for the faith once entrusted to our ancestors and now to us by many American missionaries whose burial tombs all across Africa are a testimony of their sacrificial labor to proclaiming the liberating gospel of Jesus Christ that we dare to sustain in Africa. To God be the glory. I love that final note because it's a final repudiation of liberal theology, which teaches racial resentment from people of color to white Westerners. They've been given this narrative from lefties saying that we were colonialist powers and we were only there to take advantage of them, and they're rejecting that. They saw the sacrifices of the missionaries who brought over the gospel out of nothing but a pure love for them and a desire to save them. And so the black and brown people who gave faith to white people in the West, that has resulted in faith being brought back to the African continent, and they're rejoicing in that and in the unity that is actually had across races and regions and should be rebuked by the church instead of embraced by regionalization. So it's really a very fine document. Of course, if they wrote a lot longer, they could cover a lot more details, but you have to try and be succinct to get people's attention, which is probably why I should cut things off now. But here's a final exhortation. There are more people in the United Methodist Church now finally watching me, and I just need to exhort you. Friends, there is a temptation right now among the left to go ahead and force everything through and then retcon how you're the good guys afterwards, and that's just not going to happen. If you push it through, there's going to be such a stink on all of this that I think the whole thing is going to come crashing down. All good order and discipline is going to disappear. The leadership of the denomination is going to be exposed as having no integrity. Whenever the leadership does what they can rather than as they ought, that's when it loses moral credibility. And if you are going to try and take, there are people like Lonnie Brooks who want victory for the side of the left, but they want it in the right way, in a godly way. And if you want that, then you cannot go through with this general conference to do anything other than to establish a constitutional convention to rally the troops and get things back together and let people out on the way who want out. Because I had the privilege of I wanted off the ride. I did not like what was going on. I'm glad I got off. But it's killing me that there's people left behind, and there are not people of good conscience in control right now who have no shame about taking advantage of them. And, shame on you. So y'all are going to do what you're going to do next week, but it's not going to be for lack of me trying to persuade the reasonable and conscientious among you. Have a heart for people who don't look like you, who come from a different place in the world than you. You know they've been done wrong. You know you can't go forward. Pray about it. You know it ain't right. That's going to be the end for me today. Bye.